And welcome, Hoosier fans, to another episode of Podcast on the Brink, your weekly dose of Indiana University basketball news and discussion. I'm your host, Jerod Morris. Podcast on the Brink is a joint production of the Assembly Call and Inside the Hall. For complete coverage of IU basketball, visit assemblycall.com and insidethehall.com. On this week's edition of Podcast on the Brink, we unfortunately dive into the offseason way too early. What is this, the first week in March, and it's the offseason already? We can't have too many more seasons like this in the future, but Alex Bozich is here, and we take our first stab at looking at the offseason. Obviously, we start by looking back at the Big Ten tournament in Madison Square Garden, talking about Indiana's loss to Rutgers, and then we look ahead to Juwan Morgan's offseason decision. What is the biggest development that needs to happen for Indiana this offseason in terms of individuals, and then what's coming up with Romeo Langford in the state tournament. All of that and more on this week's edition of Podcast on the Brink. Buying tickets can be complicated and confusing, but there is a better way to buy with SeatGeek. SeatGeek is the smartest, easiest way to get tickets to every type of live event, because whether you're searching for a last-minute deal, planning a night out with friends, or need to find the perfect gift, SeatGeek helps you find the best seats at the best prices, and it's all fully guaranteed. There is nothing quite like being there in person, and SeatGeek will get you closer to the action for a great value. I have the SeatGeek app on my phone right now, and it is by far the easiest way that I have found to shop for tickets, because I can be anywhere, and with just a few taps, I can instantly find seats. And I'm planning on using the SeatGeek app here in just a few weeks. I was actually just texting with a fellow IU fan friend last night, and we're plotting going to see Yogi play for the Mavericks. It's a little hard for me to do that during the IU season, but once the season is over, I plan on getting out there at least once, hopefully a couple times, and I'm definitely going to use the SeatGeek app, because when I've done it in the past, that's how I've gotten my tickets, and it really is easy, really the best way to do it. And the reason for that is because SeatGeek is designed to make your ticket buying experience easier than ever, because they save you time and money by searching multiple ticket sites to compare prices and find you amazing deals. And one way to make that deal even more amazing is to use the promo code BRINK, B-R-I-N-K, because when you do that, you get $20 off of your first SeatGeek purchase. So the instructions there are just download the SeatGeek app, enter the promo code BRINK, B-R-I-N-K, and you will get $20 off your first SeatGeek purchase. All right, and I am joined here on Podcast on the Brink by Alex Bozich for, Alex, the first of what will be many off-season discussions about the Indiana Hoosiers. But it's still kind of strange to be having an off-season discussion on March 6th. That feels way too early for the season to be ending, and that, of course, is in part because we don't expect Indiana to get a bid to the NIT. So their season is over with the loss to Rutgers in the Big Ten tournament, and the fact that the Big Ten tournament was pushed up means that happens a week earlier. So very strange to already be talking off-season, and we're not even out of the first week in March yet.
Yeah, well, I think there's a chance if every regular season champion of the smaller conferences wins their conference tournament, that IU could sneak into the NIT as an 8 seed. And next week we will be breaking down the NIT bracket right here on Podcast on the Brink. But actually, I'm hoping that doesn't happen, just because, although it would be nice to see maybe a couple more games from this team, I think time to move on. Time to get into the off season. Obviously, the state tournament here in Indiana is going to be fascinating to watch over the next couple of weeks, and the fans, for the most part, the feedback I've been hearing, people are excited for the future and ready to close the book on this season. And I know that Archie Miller said they're not expecting any type of postseason for this year for Indiana, but we can't officially close the book, obviously, until the selection show on Sunday night.
Yeah. I guess the way that I felt about it after the Rutgers game is I definitely wanted to see, before that game, I definitely wanted to see, some kind of postseason, Indiana make the NIT. But then I kind of figured, well, if we're going to lose to Rutgers like this, then maybe I don't really want to see more games. With a few days to reflect on it, I would love to see them back in somehow to the NIT, which seems like the only way that they would make it. But like you said, we'll just have to wait and see. And if that happens, we can be pleasantly surprised and, reopen the discussions about last season and for as long as they're in the NIT. But let me ask you this question. And I know Archie said that they're not expecting it. How are they approaching it? Are they still practicing and getting workouts in on the off chance? Or, have they kind of wrapped things up? And if they do end up making it, they'll have to kind of scramble to get things back together before they would play a game. Do you know?
I don't know what they're doing. I would not. My guess is they're not going through practice at this point, although I can't say that for certain. That would just be my guess.
Yeah.
There's no reason to go through. If you think the season's over, there's no reason to really practice. I would think at this point that players and coaches all need a little bit of a break from the season and from each other. So I guess it's possible maybe that they're doing some workouts. And I know usually when the season ends, there's some off-season workouts, but we haven't been given any information or insight as to what they're doing. But I would be surprised if they're on any type of regular practice schedule at this point.
You mentioned the state tournament. I definitely want to talk with you about that here toward the end. But you were, before we get to that, you were up in New York for the Big Ten tournament, right, at Madison Square Garden?
I was up there, but I actually did not go to Thursday's game. It was a weird
that's
story,
right. That's right. Yeah.
Because that storm was moving in, and I had some concern that I wasn't going to be able to get out in time for the New Albany Floyd Central game on Saturday. So I actually went ahead and departed early. Josh stayed up there to cover the game, and so it was kind of weird. I got a chance to do a lot of sightseeing on Wednesday in New York City, but then once I got this alert on my phone from Southwest, it was like basically saying travel's likely to be impacted regarding your flight. Ultimately, it ended up that I would have been able to get out fine, but I came home and was able to go to the sectional. But it was just a weird, I think, setup in general for the Big Ten tournament. I know there's been a lot of debate as to whether it worked up there, and some people say it did work, others say it didn't.
There's been a lot more positive commentary from some of the national voices and even some local voices than I was expecting, I have to say.
Yeah, I mean, a trip to New York's never a bad thing. It's a great city. It just felt different. Obviously, it felt different last year, too, in D.C. To me, the Big Ten is a Midwest league. The Big Ten tournament, which is, the showcase event for the league basically every season, just feels like it belongs in Indianapolis and Chicago. You know what to expect on a year in, year out basis when the event's held there. I thought it was it's always fun to go to those places, and not to say that it wasn't fun to go to New York because there's a ton to do there. I just question whether the city itself actually cared much about the event. And I know people are pointing to attendance and how when is a reason to call it successful, but it's a city with I don't know the population, but it shouldn't be surprising that they had a decent showing in a city with 8 or 9 million people total. I mean, there's tons of Big Ten alums that can make it to the games. So we could debate whether or not it was a success. I think ultimately we look at how it affected the Big Ten schedule this year. And I know some of that had to do with TV and the new Fox deal, but it just felt like a really odd Big Ten season for a lot of reasons. The New York thing, obviously, and then just the compacted schedule. I'm looking forward to future seasons when we get back to more of a normal feel. Although with the addition of 2 more games and Fox here to stay as a TV partner, I'm really interested to see how the schedule is handled going forward. I hope that there is consideration given to all of those one-day turnarounds that we had this season, because I just thought in the end it wasn't good for anybody involved.
Yeah. I don't know. My fear is that what we experienced this year is going to be more close to the new normal than any of us would like, especially when you factor in the TV. But I suppose we'll have to wait and see on that. Concerning the Hoosiers' play on the floor, again, you weren't there to see it, but as you now look back on that performance against Rutgers, which, In a lot of ways, as I've reflected on it, was kind of a microcosm of the season in a sense, just that it was so weird and just that it featured Indiana play so well for a stretch, there in the beginning, and then just play so inexplicably bad after that. It's one of those where it almost would have made more sense if Indiana had just played really bad the whole way out, and you chalk it up to not being ready to play and we just weren't, ready for the Big Ten tournament, whatever. But to start out that well, playing some of your best basketball, and then to have the script totally flipped and just not be able to get things back, kind of under control against a team like Rutgers that just, had another one of those crazy shooting nights like we've seen teams have against Indiana this season. Like, how do you, there's probably not a great way to explain it, but I guess what was your main takeaway from that, and how did you make sense of just a really strange Indiana performance in that game?
Yeah, I had a feeling when I wrote my items to watch for in the game that Corey Sanders was going to be the storyline, and I felt like he was either going to come out and play like he did the first matchup, or I thought he was going to come out and kind of take over the game. And early on, he was virtually a non-factor, and that's when Indiana built up that 16-point lead. But once he started making shots and gaining confidence, you got the feeling that Indiana was knocked back on its heels a little bit. They had a really tough time getting the ball to Juwan Morgan. I know he ended up with pretty solid stats, but they were kind of forced out of some of the things they normally like to do. And give Rutgers credit. I mean, they're a good defensive team. They're a pretty terrible offensive team when you look at their numbers in Big Ten play. But, Indiana did not play well defensively, obviously, after getting that early lead. And then I think the inability to contain Corey Sanders was their undoing more than anything else. I didn't look at it as, Indiana gave up or kind of quit in the game at all. I thought Corey Sanders made some very difficult shots. I mean, you go back and watch the film, some of those that he made were just absolute dagger shots that, a lot of teams aren't going to be able to stop. So you kind of tip your hat on that. But overall, it just kind of speaks to the inconsistent nature of this whole season. I mean, Indiana was at its best capable of playing with anybody in the country, as we saw, them go toe-to-toe with teams like Michigan State, Duke, Purdue, Ohio State, and just fall up short. And then they were also capable of having clunkers like, the Fort Wayne game, the Indiana State game, and then losing to Rutgers to close the season. It just kind of speaks to the ups and downs of the year in general and the inconsistent play overall. Yeah.
So you mentioned Juwan Morgan, and there are plenty of big offseason storylines that we will track as we go through this offseason. Where's Romeo going to go? Who are the guys that really need to step up and develop in the offseason for Indiana? But one of the most important ones is going to be, what does Juwan Morgan do? And, there's been a lot of speculation as the season has gone on, especially since that Notre Dame game, about whether he would, opt to play professionally instead of coming back for his senior year. And I think most people expect that he will do the prudent thing, which is put his name in, get as much feedback as possible before he makes his decision, similar to what Robert Johnson did this past offseason. From the reports that I have read, from people who were there, it sounds like they kind of got the impression that he was already looking toward next season and kind of speaking like a guy who will be back and, thinking about what he needs to do as a leader and that kind of stuff. What is your expectation for how Juwan will approach the offseason and kind of what you expect his final decision to be?
Yeah, I mean, there's no risk in obviously testing the waters, throwing your name in there. If you get a combine invite, go to the combine. If you don't get a combine invite, go work out for some teams. But I think that's a pretty clear indication that you're not going to get picked, or it's a long shot for you to get picked if you're not invited to the combine. And, last couple of games at Assembly Hall, there were some NBA people there that, that always come and just kind of casually asked a couple of them in the media room, do you think Juwan Morgan would be somebody that would get a combine invite? And, I only asked 2 or 3 people, but none of them thought that he would. So I would say that unless he's just dead set on going professional and trying to make it through the G League or going overseas, the chances that he would be back for his senior season in Bloomington are high. But as we've seen in these situations last year with James Blackman Jr., I mean, he leaves after his junior year and he's now in the G League. And, that was his decision to kind of go ahead and embark on a professional career. without exhausting his eligibility. So it's kind of up to each individual guy on what they do and how they come to the decision-making process. But, I agree with kind of what everyone has written coming out of New York, that he's going to, test the waters, get the feedback, and then make an educated decision. But he just doesn't strike me as a guy that's going to leave early unless he has a pretty good idea of either getting picked or having a clear path to make it to the NBA. I just don't see him being a guy that's going to want to throw his name in there and just see what happens.
Yeah, I think it's important to remember in these situations, because I see a lot of people talking about this, and it seems like they have the perspective of 20 years ago almost, where it's like, you've got to be NBA ready or it's a bad decision. And I think with how many opportunities there are in the G League overseas to make good money, it's a little bit of a different calculation, especially for a guy like Juwan who's had some injury issues. Maybe getting an extra year of playing for pay in his 20s, will be attractive to him. So I don't think you can boil it down to just, is he NBA ready or not? Because he's probably not at this point, but that's not the only thing that he might weigh in this decision. So I would just urge people to, think a little bit bigger picture about the decision that he's making, because it's not quite as cut and dried as some want to make it, I think.
Right. I mean, there's a lot of things you weigh. You look at, do you want to go to school for another year? Do you enjoy being a college student? Do you like your teammates? Do you like the coaching staff? Do you like being around everybody? Do you want to be part of a team, or do you want to kind of go be on your own? Because, if you go to the G League, you're not really a part of a team. You're kind of fighting for your professional life in a sense. I mean, if you ever watched a D League or G League, whatever they call it now, game,
yeah,
these are guys that are going out there just trying to get stats to get noticed by somebody. So there's a lot of things, and I don't mean like, do you like your teammates or coaching staff? If Juwan were to leave, I'm not saying that he doesn't like his teammates or his coaching staff. Don't take that in the wrong way. I'm just saying, what's more important to you? Do you want to be a professional? Do you want to just be a basketball player, or do you want to kind of have one more year of kind of being the guy, the big man on campus, being a part of something that really you won't ever have a chance to do again? And so those are kind of the things that you weigh. But I don't think in a lot of ways, knowing what I do about Juwan Morgan and just kind of his personality and his qualities as a human being, I think he's going to be successful whatever he decides to do. If he decides that he wants to go pro and try to make it on his own, I think people should support him and be happy for him. And if he decides to come back, I would say the same thing, be supportive and be happy for him. But I think with him specifically, you just look at what he needs to do to become a viable NBA player. I think the main thing is he really has to show that he can shoot the ball from the perimeter, because there's not a lot of guys in the NBA who are 6'7", 6'8" that can just bully their way to the basket. And, being honest about how he excelled this year, a lot of it was offensive rebounding and just being able to overpower guys with his kind of presence on the block. And I just don't know how that translates to a long-term NBA career. So if he could come back and show that he's a viable threat from the mid range and from the perimeter consistently, maybe he doesn't even get picked next year, but maybe he's at that point convinced the team that he's worth a two-way contract, or using a second round pick to kind of give him some time to develop. But ultimately, I think it's an uphill battle for him to be an NBA player. But I wouldn't put it past him being able to accomplish it, because the leap that we saw him take from his sophomore to junior year was pretty extraordinary, and if he can do that again, who knows what the future holds for him.
Yeah, no question. And Juwan Morgan is a proud Hoosier, and if you are a proud Hoosier as well, then Alex and I would both like to suggest that you go to HoosierProud.com. They have been a new sponsor on Podcast On The Brink this season, and we've really enjoyed having them and talking about them on these shows throughout the season. And so if you haven't had a chance to check out their website yet, HoosierProud.com, you really should. Connor got really excited about Indiana potentially making a run in the Big Ten tournament, and maybe playing in the NIT, and put up a couple of new really cool Indiana shirts right before the tournament started. Unfortunately, as we mentioned, Indiana's stay in the Big Ten tournament wasn't very long. But those shirts will be great. even as you look toward next year and seasons in the future when we expect Indiana to hang around in the Big Ten tournament a little bit longer. Well, I don't know if that's kind of foolish because we never hang around the Big Ten tournament very long, but at least making the NCAA tournament, maybe making deeper runs there, which sometimes seems a little bit more likely. But you can go check out those shirts on the IU basketball page at HoosierProud.com because they have a bunch of new officially licensed IU gear, in addition to the official Inside the Hall t-shirts that they started carrying this year, and their flagship products, which are t-shirts with designs inspired by unique elements of the Hoosier State. It is all there at HoosierProud.com. And the nice thing is, when you purchase t-shirts from HoosierProud.com, a portion of the revenue goes to support Indiana-based charities. And you can find out the charities that they support there on their website. And you save money because they give you 15% off of your entire order since you are a Podcast on the Brink listener. So use the promo code BRINK, B-R-I-N-K, at checkout, and you will get 15% off of that entire order. Again, the promo code BRINK, B-R-I-N-K, at HoosierProud.com. Well, Alex, as we, obviously that's going to be a big story to follow. The other thing that's going to be interesting to follow this offseason is the grad transfer market. And something that just happened to me about 10 minutes before we got on this recording is something I think we're both likely to see a lot the rest of the season. Jeff Goodman tweeted out that Maine senior guard Aaron Calixte told ESPN he will transfer eligible next season, averaged 17 points per game this year. I was immediately tweeted this by a bunch of people, so I ran to Ken Palm to look up the guy's stats. And, solid shooter, but he's 5'11", had an offensive rating of under 100 against the 224th ranked conference, and his turnover rate was higher than his assist rate. And he doesn't rebound, which isn't going to be something that Archie Miller would like very much. But given the dearth of guards that Indiana has right now, and obviously we have to see what Romeo decides. But any guard that comes up that is, a potential grad transfer is going to garner interest from Indiana fans and probably Indiana coaches too. How do you plan to go about keeping track of the grad transfer market this season? Because it certainly seems like a place where Indiana would be prudent to really spend some time looking for a guy who can come help out next season.
Yeah, it has to be the perfect fit, and I think Indiana fans maybe have been a little spoiled by the success of the grad transfers that have come in recent years. Obviously, Nick Zeisloft and Max Bielfeldt worked out perfectly for Indiana, but the Evan Gordon situation was one that didn't turn out great in terms of his impact, and he was coming from a major conference school. And then you don't have to look far either in the Big Ten this year to look at two cases. Jerron Simmons, who's a kid that played at Ohio, was very good last year, went to Michigan this year, and doesn't even really get off the bench. And he was the guy in the preseason that many people thought was going to be Michigan's point guard. And I think he's third on their depth chart now at point and sitting on the bench. The other guy, Mark Allstork, who came from a similar situation, went to Illinois. A lot of people thought he would be their best player, and by the end of the season, he was just another guy on their roster. So you have to kind of look at these situations on a case-by-case basis. I don't necessarily think that there's going to be a grad transfer that can come in and take on a major role in terms of just being a great player, because most of them are moving up in league, and there's a reason that they were at a smaller school to begin with. Now, I'm not saying you can't go out and find somebody like a Nick Zeisloft that can ultimately help you win games, but I think Indiana's best chance is obviously to improve the guard situation. Left, obviously, is Romeo Langford, and developing the guys who are in the program. Robert Fennessy is obviously going to come in, a big summer for him. Al Durham, a huge offseason for him, and Devontae Green as well. Those guys to me are the bigger thing. But in terms of the grad transfer, the springtime in recruiting is always dangerous. It's not only dangerous from the prep scene, it's also from the grad transfer, because there's a scarcity of guys available and there's schools that need to fill their spots. So sometimes you overreach. And I think one thing you're not going to see with the Indiana coaching staff that we may have seen under the previous regime is a reach for a guy who doesn't fit the culture or doesn't fit in terms of what is trying to be accomplished. Because the worst thing you can do is take somebody just to fill a spot and then have a guy who's either unhappy or just kind of rotting on the bench for a year. That doesn't work out well for anybody. So I'm obviously going to keep my my eyes and ears open to see who's out there and available. But I would caution people to view these situations as anything more than really a depth add. I mean, you look at, Max Bielfeldt and Nick Zeisloff to me were, great in terms of their impact, but they were bench players. They were obviously important for Indiana to be successful in those seasons. But, what you're probably going to get if you do take a grad transfer is a guy who can add depth, who can maybe bring some experience, maybe play some defense, knock down an occasional 3-point shot. But I don't think you're going to go and find a Big Ten level starter from a lower conference school. I mean, Jerod, do you agree with that? I mean, how do you kind of assess the situation and how Indiana should go about it?
I agree wholeheartedly with what you just said. I mean, I think at best, it feels like you can find a really good role player. And that's important. Like you mentioned Nick Zeisloff and Max Bielfeldt, who were huge role players that Indiana doesn't win a Big Ten title without. But I think back to, who was it? Anthony Lee, I think was his name, the guy who was a grad transfer from Temple. Yes. Everybody got all excited because, maybe he can fill the big man void that Indiana was going to have. And he ends up going to Ohio State. And I don't even think he played very much for Ohio State that year. So, you can see these guys and it might feel like a sure thing, but until they get in there, until you figure out if they're the right fit, you really don't know. And so I think, to me, what Tom Crean did so well with Nick Zeisloff and Max Bielfeldt was have a vision for how those guys fit into his program, and articulated that vision to them and then really executed it well with them here. And that's why those guys were such terrific transfers. You mentioned some other spring recruiting decisions that Tom Crean made that didn't work out quite so well. And the vision that he had, it just didn't pan out quite as well as he thought that it might. And so I think that's the most important thing, is you've really got to have a vision for who this guy is as a player, how he's going to fit into what you're doing, or, you're better off, letting a freshman maybe get some more of those minutes and developing a guy who's going to be a 3 or 4 year part of your program than trying to reach for someone, right, that may end up just taking valuable minutes away from somebody else.
Yeah, I mean, there's just not very many. This all sounds great in theory, and these names are going to be coming out. The recruiting guys will be mentioning all these names. Guys are going to grad transfer, and there'll be these long lists of schools attached to them, and there'll be guys who people say, well, this guy could really help. This guy can really help. But real world experience, what's when the tournament bracket's announced and the balls are tipped and they get to the Sweet 16, the Elite Eight, how many of these grad transfer guys are actually playing a significant role on a winning team? So I agree with you. If you're going to reach for a guy, you might as well just let the younger guys in the program get the experience, and not, potentially mess up chemistry or bring somebody in that doesn't fit just to fill a roster spot. I think that's the difference here. I think if Indiana does take a grad transfer, I'm going to be pretty confident that it's going to be somebody that can help.
One more quick question for you before we talk a little bit about Romeo. As you look toward the offseason, and we'll have a lot more time to break this down as we go through, but just kind of your gut reaction, outside of Juwan Morgan coming back, what do you think is the other single most important development for Indiana this offseason? Is it, Justin Smith, adding more to his game? Is it Deron Davis coming back healthy? Is it, Robert Finney, being ready to take over the point guard as a freshman? Is it Devontae Green kind of getting his mind right and, learning how to focus from game to game? Like, what would be the number one thing on your list that will have the biggest impact for Indiana next season that could happen this offseason, outside of Romeo coming too?
Wow, those are all things to
a lot of things need to happen this offseason.
Yeah, I would say I can get on board with Justin Smith, because I think Justin Smith is going to be really, really good as early as next season, depending on what he does this offseason. To me, he has to get better. Just with we talked about this, I think, a couple weeks ago. Just his motor needs to get accelerated a little bit, and I think he needs to just become more confident in his decision making out there. But I saw a lot of good things out of him down the stretch of the season that leads me to believe that he's going to be very good. The other one that you mentioned that kind of sticks out, I'm confident that Robert Finney is going to come in and be a solid player from the get go. But I think it's pivotal that Al Durham and Devontae Green both improve a lot, because I don't think this team's going to have much problem in the front court. I think there's going to be enough pieces to be to be able to compete with most Big Ten teams. But the guard situation, depending on how it shakes out, I mean, is really you win with really good guards in college basketball. We saw Indiana this year didn't really have a great situation at point guard. Robert Johnson obviously played better towards the end of the season, but he was more of an off guard. And so I look at whoever is there has to be more than capable of holding their own, whether Romeo comes or not. I mean, Indiana, the season's going to go on with or without Romeo, and obviously it's great if he comes, but if he doesn't come, the guys I mentioned, Devontae Green, Robert Finney, Al Durham, all have to be ready to step in and play major roles. So I would say the guard situation and Justin Smith to me are the two biggest intriguing offseason storylines, other than what happens with Juwan Morgan.
So you mentioned Romeo. Let's end talking about him. You and I were chatting a couple days ago, and we both kind of remarked that if Indiana was going to have a season where they kind of bow out early, this is kind of the one to do it, just because there's so much intrigue about, how this year's state tournament will go with Romeo. And obviously, Robert Finney's team is no longer playing, but Demezy Anderson's team working on an undefeated season. Mm-hmm. So much intrigue there. Now, you can obviously turn your attention to that, and a lot of IU fans are as well. What are kind of your plans? Are you going to try and go to all the New Albany games? And what do you expect from them as they try to notch another state title before Romeo heads off to college and beyond?
Yeah, I'll be Saturday. I'll be going up to Seymour for the games. Obviously, New Albany plays Bloomington South in the second game. The first game is Evansville North and Center Grove, and obviously there's an IU tie-in there because Trace Jackson Davis plays for Center Grove, and he's one of IU's top targets in the class of 2019. So I could see both guys there. But yeah, I'm gonna go to pretty much every New Albany game the rest of the way, as long as they're still in the tournament. And even if they don't make it to state, if Demezy Anderson's there, or Keon Brooks, or Trace Jackson Davis, I'm going to go to the state finals and cover that, because there's obviously no Indiana games to follow at this point. And IU fans seem to have a pretty good appetite for the, obviously for recruiting coverage, and this year's state tournament I think is going to end up being one of the better ones in recent history, just because there's a lot of great players spread across several different classes. And so I think it would be awesome to see a state championship game of South Bend Riley against New Albany. I'm not saying it's going to happen, but I think it would be a lot of fun to watch, just because I had a chance to watch two South Bend Riley games on video yesterday, and man, they're relentless with their pressure. They're athletic. It'd be fun to see them go up and down with New Albany. I think it'd be just an outstanding game to watch. But there's a lot of great teams across the state. Upsets can happen. I don't think it's for sure that New Albany is going to get past Bloomington South. I mean, Bloomington South's a really well-coached team. Gave them a tough game early in the season up at Bloomington South, and nobody's going to lay down and just let New Albany get to the state championship game. And even if they do get out of regional, I think there's a potential roadblock at semi-state with maybe Warren Central or Ben Davis. So I think it's going to be a great state tournament, and I'm really looking forward. If I can't cover the NCAA tournament, it's not a bad consolation prize to be able to follow the state tournament in Indiana high school basketball.
Last question for you: are you making any plans to go to the McDonald's game?
I am. Yes, I got a media credential for the McDonald's game, so we will see. Obviously, if Romeo is going to make his announcement there, it's kind of a must attend. If he's not going to announce there, probably will still go, but not for certain on that, because the actual game itself I don't necessarily think has a ton of value.
Yeah.
No offense to anybody that likes watching high school all-star games, but I just don't think you really learn a whole lot. It's really more of a fun thing, personal individual accolade for the players who get to go. So I'll fill it out and see if he's gonna, if there's a good indication that he's gonna actually announce his decision there. Obviously you need to be there for that, but we'll see. I don't think there's been any news one way or the other if he's going to actually do it there. And if they do make it to state, I would kind of be surprised if he does do it at the McDonald's game, simply because there's been talk of another trip to Bloomington. I know that the state championship game is on March 24th, and they have to report to the McDonald's game the next day. So unless the decision's already been made and they're just kind of sitting on it and waiting, I would kind of be surprised if they're able to do that quick of a turnaround. But we'll see. Obviously, going to continue to try to figure out when it's going to happen, and I'm sure they'll do a good job of kind of letting everyone know if it's going to be at McDonald's, because I'm sure it'll be on ESPN in that instance if he's going to do it there. Otherwise, I would expect probably him to maybe do it at New Albany or something like that. So it's going to be a long couple of weeks here. I know for Indiana fans, there's a ton of interest in this recruitment, but ultimately, wherever he decides, hopefully everyone will support the young man regardless. I think he's done just a really good job of carrying himself, and all the things that he's done in the community. Being someone that's from New Albany, just to see some of the things that he's done in terms of going visiting kids and just all the autographs he's signed, all the pictures he's taken, it's clear that he deserves people's respect regardless of where he ends up. So hopefully he'll be treated as such. But I know everyone wants him to go to IU, and they're the fans that are showing up to these games have let it be known with the IU chants all season long. So I think it's going to be a lot of fun here over the next couple weeks to follow, and hopefully here in a month or so, maybe we'll have an idea of where he's going to end up.
Yeah, well, you can be sure that we will be talking about that topic a lot as we go through the early part of the offseason, and hopefully it's a topic we continue talking about all through the offseason because he commits, but like you said, we will find out, and certainly plan on supporting him no matter where he chooses to go. All right, Alex, I think we powered through this first off-season edition. Throw is a little bit difficult to get through, but now we can start rolling here in the off-season, and we have a lot of good episodes planned for everybody. We'll obviously talk about the team and analyze it from a lot of different angles, bring in some national voices. We'll try and get players on in the off-season as we always do. Anything else that you're kind of planning to do this off-season, or that you'd like to do this off-season with the podcast?
Well, from a podcast perspective, I would say those of you who listen to us regularly, shoot Jerod or I an email if you have an idea of a certain topic that you want us to go over, or a guest you want us to get. I mean, It's always fun for us to talk to former players, whether that be the guys who just are now leaving the program. We obviously have had guys like Max Bielfeldt, Nick Zeisloft on in previous off seasons. But if there's other players that maybe for whatever reason you'd like to hear from or know what they're up to, we'd be more than happy to listen to your suggestions. And if there's any national guests that you want us to try to get and talk certain subjects with me, this is going to be a longer off season than usual, and the podcast is still going to be going once a week. So we're all ears when it comes to your suggestions. So, shoot us a tweet, shoot us an email. Leave a comment on Inside the Hall on the episode page, and we'll try our best to accommodate your requests. Now, can't promise that we'll be able to do anything that's asked of us, but we will listen to your suggestions, and we'll try to do our best to if there's a good idea that makes sense. Well said.
All right, Alex, thank you for your time, and thank you for listening. And we will be back to talk IU hoops again with you next week on Podcast on the Brink. Thank you for listening to this episode of Podcast on the Brink. We always appreciate you being here. To get more from me and from Alex, visit assemblycall.com and insidethehall.com for complete coverage of Indiana University basketball. If you liked this episode, please consider sharing it with a friend or family member who loves IU basketball as much as you do. You can also support the show by leaving a rating and review on iTunes, which helps us get the word out to more IU fans like yourself. We will be back next week with a new episode. Until then, as always, go Hoosiers.